a lot of uncertainty and disagreement and all kinds of things about that, particularly when it comes to proposed plans for human spaceflight. This hearing is an important opportunity to take a close look at those plans and others. I said before in this committee, and I've addressed it directly with Administrator Bolden, that during his confirmation that I believe, from my personal point of view, that we need a new direction. To many, including myself, defenders of the status quo for NASA, be they many or be they few, seem to justify their views solely based on job impact. I don't think we can afford to do that. Jobs in West Virginia are subject number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and always will be. This is a national and international program that we're talking about. I think we have to strike a balance between economic development, which means jobs, and modernizing our space so we can remain competitive for years to come. NASA's first mission must be to do what is best for the nation. The American people deserve the most from their space program. NASA's role cannot stay static. The President has challenged the United States government to seek greater international collaboration, enable commercial services, develop new exploration technologies, and on top of that, I would include vastly expand research. You're doing something up there right now, MRSA, which kills thousands and thousands of people every year in this country. And that kind of medical research, broad research, technical research, engineering research, all kinds of research. No better place to do it. And I think we have to develop new exploration technologies. So these are good priorities, and they should help ensure that in tough fiscal times we build our space future in a measured and relevant and innovative and sustainable way. And this is not going to be easy. One reason it's not going to be easy is because we are under a more or less flatline budget. Most Americans don't know that. I think most of them would welcome it if they did know it. But those of us who work in government who want to push programs forward, et cetera, that's a hard pill to swallow. That does not affect the Defense Department. It does not affect the intelligence community. It affects only parts of the veterans community. But NASA's current budget of $18 billion may be a high watermark. We don't know. What does soft freeze mean? But it may be a high watermark for years to come. So we have to live with that and make the most of it. We cannot assume the agency will have unlimited resources for every mission it wants to undertake, so therefore we have to make hard choices. Today I look forward to taking a robust evaluation of the agency's plan for human spaceflight. But more than that, we have to measure and shape those goals against our greater national priorities for the years and the decades ahead. I really feel strongly about that. NASA's Aeronautics help create our global leadership in aviation. We need its scientific minds to be involved, solving today's and tomorrow's challenges in energy, in medical research, robotics. I've talked about these things. I really mean them. In addition, we need to understand how it will support our workforce and protect our industrial base, ensure our national security, and strengthen international relationships. And we have to examine how we use human spaceflight as an important tool of smart power, exemplified by the International Space Station Partnership and strong U.S. and Russian participation. So efforts like this can build stability. They can ensure global access to space and help us move forward towards greater transparency as we establish the rules of the road, which is what I think we are here to do. I know that our focus today is specifically on human spaceflight. I recognize that. But I do not want anybody to forget the agency's broader priorities, which include exploration, science, aeronautics, education, technology, research of any and all kinds. These are the foundations of our future. They are enormously important, and I hope the agency finds that balance and moves forward again. I also hope that we will increase our focus on tying NASA's human spaceflight efforts to benefits in these areas. I want to thank all of our witnesses today, including those who will follow, the two that sit before us now, both extremely distinguished Americans, including Mr. Neil Armstrong, commander of Apollo 11, and Eugene Cernan, commander of Apollo 17. We thank them for their service. In the past, I should say in ending, I have been critical of NASA's financial and program management. I am still that way. As we move towards reauthorization, I firmly believe this committee has a huge oversight role to play. NASA cannot continue down the same path. I turn now to my distinguished partner, Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very pleased that we have this hearing because I have been alarmed at the plans that have been put forward, not with the goal of the plans. I agree with the goal. We should utilize space for science and research that cannot be done as well in the gravity conditions on Earth, and we need to be bold in exploring space so that we maintain our superiority in space exploration. I appreciate, obviously, the two of you, General Bolden. You've been an astronaut and have a distinguished career and are now the NASA administrator, and Dr. Holdren from the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. And I'm very pleased, Mr. Chairman, that we do have the first man who walked on the moon and the last man who walked on the moon in our second panel, Neil Armstrong and Eugene Cernan, along with Norm Augustine, who was tasked to come up with options that would save NASA, our space exploration, and putting humans in space. I find serious flaws in the areas where detailed information has been provided by the President's administration. There are good reasons to have reservations about a proposal that discards billions of dollars of important technology and engineering advancements paid for by American taxpayers and puts us on a course that relies on a still developing commercial market to fill a role carried on for more than 5 decades by the world's preeminent space agency. Our 40-year legacy of leadership in space is on the line, and we need to have a credible plan to take the next step forward, enhancing our investment of the last 4 decades. We will get to Mars by building upon our existing capabilities, including our infrastructure, prior investment, and the most skilled workforce in the world. We do not need a presidential commission to manage the transition of NASA workers to other jobs or other places. We need a plan that preserves their extraordinary talents and challenges them to work on new goals and technologies, to build a bridge from where we are to where we want to be. Every assumption in the President's proposal that is made about the potential development of a new technology or the emergence of a customer base beyond NASA to support a fledgling commercial space industry is another source of risk and another point of potential mid-program failure that could undermine our human spaceflight capability. We must leverage our existing capabilities and workforce to reach our goal. That is why, for me, the discussion begins with the International Space Station, which underpins our reason to send humans into space in the short and midterm while we work on new technologies to take us deeper into space. Flying out the shuttle program on the current schedule before performing the analysis of International Space Station equipment that will need to be done to extend the life of the shuttle from 2015 to 2020, which is the President's goal, is a risk. It is particularly risky when those potential needs have not been mapped against or anticipated cargo capabilities that will provide our only means to bring cargo to the station in a world without the space shuttle. I have proposed stretching out the remaining shuttle missions over the next 2 years. and adding the launch on need flight as an actual flight with available cargo capabilities. That would allow for the analysis and planning that we must have to minimize the risk to the ISS, the International Space Station, and bridge the gap that has been a concern of mine and also Senator Nelson's since it was first proposed 4 or 5 years ago. The space station provides our primary reason for current and future spaceflight and offers almost the entire business case for many of the emerging commercial space companies in the short run. Safety has been asserted as a reason to stop the shuttles this year. But first, I'm not proposing we add more, just spread them out over a longer period of time, 2 years. Secondly, I do not accept arguments that a Soyuz vehicle, our engineers have never had complete access study and certification, is safer than the space shuttle to carry our astronauts to and from the station. It is time to have an honest conversation about the space shuttle and its importance to our short-term capabilities. I'm hopeful that Dr. Holdren and General Bolden can finally answer some key questions on behalf of the administration today, including, have we taken every step possible to reduce the risk to the space station? How will the technology and engineering advances from $9 billion of investment in the Constellation program be leveraged and utilized if the program is discontinued? Why ignore the actual options laid out in the Augustine Committee report, and why wait until 2015 for the selection of heavy lift vehicle design? What will happen if we do not have a NASA-owned and managed capability like Constellation or some iteration of Constellation, and private providers struggle with cost overruns and ultimately fail? Will American taxpayers have to bail out these companies? What other option would we have at that point except to continue paying whatever it takes to build the vehicles because NASA capability has been dismantled? Why not reform NASA's contracting practices rather than putting all our emphasis on a still developing commercial sector that may not be able to deliver? Mr. Chairman, those are just a few of my questions. Between the proposal I have advanced, the thoughts of other members, and the recommendations in the Augustine report, there are many ideas about how to reach bold new goals. American exceptionalism demands that we do better than the proposal that has been put forward that does not have the plans to implement it in a safe and secure way. Mr. Chairman, I would just say that I stand ready to work with the administration. I would like for this administration to have the legacy of continuing our preeminence in space. I do not think the proposal that has been put forward will do that, but I certainly would like to work in a bipartisan and certainly collegial way to achieve a goal that I think is the same as the President's, but I don't think he is putting forward the plan to achieve the goal. And I want to help put that together so that we will spend our taxpayer dollars wisely. We will not throw away the billions that have already been spent. So the space station, which now has 8 contracts waiting to go up through NIH and the Department of Agriculture to utilize the space station. There will be more if we know that there is true availability of the space station with a shuttle that we can control and know that if there is a gap, it will be a short gap, not a 5 to 8 and possibly 10-year gap as we have new fledgling commercial activities that attempt to do things that have already been tried and proven or not proven in the NASA history. So, Mr. Chairman, I do thank you for the hearing, and I hope that it leads us to a better consensus that we can work together toward our shared goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hutchinson. I now call on the subcommittee chair, and that is Senator Nelson, Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There is a great deal that is riding on this hearing today because we are preparing the way for us then to start the markup in your subcommittee of the authorizing legislation, and this is being done in the midst of a great deal of uncertainty about the future of NASA. We're very fortunate to have the witnesses that we have at the table who clearly ought to give us some direction. And we're very fortunate to have the three that will follow on the next panel. This is such an important hearing because there are people all across the country, including this extraordinary family called the NASA family, that has spaceflight in their genes, that are looking to us to exercise our legislative and appropriations function in helping the President and the executive branch chart the course where America's human space program is going from here. Now, there have been a lot of us that have given a lot of advice to the President, and I think in large part his speech down at the Kennedy Space Center reflected that. We ask that he consider a strong vision statement. In fact, we specifically set a vision of going to Mars, and he did that. We ask that he consider not the cancellation of the Constellation program, but the restructuring of it. And in fact, we wanted that to have the capability of giving us flexibility in the future, and we received that from his statement. We ask for the extension of the International Space Station's life, instead of it being cut off in 2015, which it was previously going to do. I mean, we're just completing it now, and it's 2010. And so you don't want to shut it off 4 years down the road. And we received that commitment from the President. Some of us ask that since there is the hardware ready for an additional shuttle flight, we ask that he consider that. And although he didn't announce that in his speech down at the Kennedy Space Center, it's my hope that that is under consideration in the White House and NASA at this point. We also ask the President for the completion, the safe completion of the current Space Shuttle manifest, even if it has to be flown into next year. And that the increases in funding for the other critical parts of NASA's budget, including science and aeronautics and Earth observation and the breakthrough research and development there, and he has proposed that. But the authorizing and the appropriating committees continue to review the President's proposal. We here in the legislative branch are going to try to continue to work with the administration to refine his plan and change some parts of it. And it's in that spirit that we come here today to take a deeper look into the details of the proposal. And specifically, some of us are going to explore how the plan relates to national priorities such as education and innovation and security, the implications of the plan, including the impacts on national security, the workforce, the industrial base, and our international posture. And we're going to look at the plan's overall integration, including the schedule and the cost. And so then we're going to be looking, Mr. Chairman, at the President's proposal to make a decision on a heavy lift vehicle solution, of which he said is as late as 2015. We'd like to speed that up. We want to establish the rationale of such a proposal and where the benefits and the challenges lie. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Senator Muir, I was going to call on you, but I should call on Senator Vitter because he's ranking on the subcommittee. Senator Vitter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for this hearing. It is a very important hearing. I agree with my colleague on the subcommittee, and the stakes are very high. I'll submit my full opening statement for the record. It underscores what I've said very clearly before, that I am extremely concerned by this plan and budget submission for NASA by the administration. And I think it is should be very concerning to the entire space community and the American people. My fundamental concerns are these three. Number one, I am convinced it will absolutely relinquish our leadership role in human flight, certainly for our lifetimes, maybe longer, if we follow down the proposed path. Number two, I repeat Senator Hutchinson's comments. I think complete reliance on the commercial sector for a capability that there is no evidence they can supply in the near term is a bad idea, because there is absolutely no evidence that that sector alone can supply this capability in the near term. I want to support that sector. I want to see that capability grow, but not put all of our eggs on that, in that basket, on that long bet. And number three, I really think we would be in the process, if we adopt the plan, of fundamentally changing NASA and making it a research institution almost solely. Mr. Chairman, you mentioned the broad category of NASA missions, and we should remember all of them, but we should start with the core mission, which is exploration and human spaceflight, and I really think this proposal forgetting to a large extent about that absolutely core central mission and putting too much emphasis on other ancillary missions. I welcome all of our panels, certainly these distinguished gentlemen and our second panel. But, Mr. Chairman, I would just make one suggestion, which is I think the original idea is to have our other three panelists go first so that we can get into more of a conversation and get more reaction from the administration officials to their very compelling testimony, in my opinion. We've heard from the administration before several times about the new vision, about the budget submission. I'm happy to hear from them again, but I honestly think it would be far more productive of real discussion and new ideas to have the other three panelists go first, to have the administration listen, and to have all of us respond to that. So that would be my suggestion to the chair.
I welcome that. And should Chairman someday, you can arrange that. Senator Lemieux, Senator Brownback, and Senator Pryor, if you could try to, and my favorite governor down there, Senator Johans, if you could keep your remarks to about 3 minutes. Senator Lemieux.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member Hutchinson, for holding this hearing today. General Bolden, Dr. Holdren, thank you for your service. Thank you for being here. I, like my colleagues, want to work in a collegial way with the administration in order to make sure that we continue our leadership role in space, but I, unfortunately, cannot take as optimistic of a view of the President's plan. For nearly 50 years, we have been the undisputed leader in space exploration. The proposal by the administration to what I would call kill the Constellation program, its Ares 1 and Ares 5 rockets, and turn the Orion vehicle into a speculative lifeboat will be, in a word, devastating. That's not my word. That is the word used by the commanders of Apollo 11, 13, and 17. It's going to be devastating for, I think, 3 main reasons. One, with the termination of the shuttle, we will be, for the first time in nearly 50 years, for a period of years, unable to go into low Earth orbit, and we will put ourselves at the mercy of the Russians. Second, we are going to dismantle a world-class workforce that will be virtually, if not completely, impossible to reconstitute. Third, we are going to relinquish our status as leaders and pioneers in space exploration. I do not look forward to the day when I will explain to my children why the Chinese are putting their flag on the moon over ours. We have spent nearly $10 billion on the Constellation program. And while it is not a perfect project, it is the law of the land. And Mr. Chairman, I think it's worth noting that Congress has been clear in reauthorizing this program twice, in 2005 and 2008, with a democratically controlled Congress and a Republican-controlled Congress. Additionally, language was specifically included in the 2010 Omnibus Appropriations Bill prohibiting the cancellation of the Constellation program. And one thing that I look forward to discussing in our questions is letters and documents I've received about programs within Constellation already being canceled. To date, no laws have changed, and Congress has not taken action to enact the changes proposed by the administration. We read in the Wall Street Journal even today about these programs being canceled. My view is that we need to stay on course with American human space exploration. We need, as my colleagues have suggested, to extend the shuttle to ensure U.S. has access to space. We need to expedite completion of the Ares 1 rocket to ensure access to low Earth orbit and the International Space Station. And finally, we need to expedite the development of a heavy lift vehicle and not wait, as my colleagues have said, until 2015. The United States leads the world in space exploration. It is one of our nation's qualities that it's admired around the world. We cannot and should not cede an inch of it to other countries. If we fail to act now, the President and this administration will be remembered for killing America's leadership in space exploration. And to me, Mr. Chairman, that is not acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, and that was absolutely perfect time. Senator Brownback.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the hearing. Certainly a strong supporter of NASA, was chair of the subcommittee some years ago. This is a great topic, and it's very timely that you're putting this together. I look forward to working with you and other members on the space program and these issues. I'm a strong supporter of NASA, as I mentioned, and of the commercial space industry, and have a steadfast belief that the United States needs a vision for the U.S. space program. I have been a proponent of phasing out the space shuttle and to use the resources for alternative deep space ventures and cutting-edge research. With the impending retirement of the shuttle, NASA is now assuming a much different role than in our past space effort, and I think there is great opportunity to have a space program that leads the world, but it will be a space program that's firmly embedded in opportunity for all. By opening up commercial space, it ensures a strong future for the U.S. in the competitive aerospace industry. Mr. Chairman, you've assembled an exceptional panel of experts. I met with Mr. Augustine 2 weeks ago. You couldn't get a better guy to talk about this, who's been around it a long period of time and sees the budget realities that we're in right now. As you mentioned, we've got a tight budgetary atmosphere. And we've got to be able to fit our goals and our dreams and our design in that. And I think what he sees is that we need to be able to integrate commercial space into doing things into low space orbit, and then NASA to move on from that point. I think there's a lot of room for discussion here, and it's an important discussion to have for us to move forward as a spacefaring nation and as a nation that leads in space. We can do it. But I think it's going to have to be under a different design than what we've been going, and I look forward to the discussion of that design. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And Senator Johans.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me, if I might, just offer a very brief thought. Like most Americans, I grew up with a tremendous amount of admiration for Neil Armstrong. I thought this man and really all the astronauts were just enormously courageous individuals. Therefore, you can only imagine that I would give his testimony a great deal of weight as I think about this hearing and prepare for it. Early on in his testimony, he said something that to me was very compelling and very concerning. He said, with regard to President Obama's 2010 plan, I have yet to find a person in NASA, the Defense Department, the Air Force, National academics, industry, academia that had knowledge of the plan prior to the announcement. Rumors abound that neither the NASA administrator nor the President's science and technology advisor were knowledgeable about the plan. Lack of review normally guarantees that there will be overlooked requirements and unwelcome consequences. How could such a chain of events happen? A plan that was invisible to so many was likely contrived by a very small group in secret who persuaded the President that this was a unique opportunity to put his stamp on a new and innovative program. I believe the President was poorly advised. If, in fact, that is the way that this was brought about, that is enormously concerning. Where does this come from is the question that I have to ask. So it's not only the concerns expressed by Senator Lemieux and others about what is happening here. It is the method and manner by which we got there. Once again, it appears a complete lack of transparency in the administration, and there's just too much of that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Pryor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for having this hearing, and Senator Hutchinson, and your leadership on this. And I have to acknowledge Senator Bill Nelson. And Senator Nelson of Florida is really without peer when it comes to looking after NASA's interest and making sure that the many and varied missions of NASA are functioning properly and getting the proper attention here in the Congress. Really, Mr. Chairman, I only would have two questions for the panels when they have a chance to answer, and that would be, first, what's the safest and most economical launch vehicle for restoring NASA's ability to fly to low Earth orbit and the International Space Station? And second is, what are NASA's plans, budget, and schedule for developing and testing a heavy lift launch system? I think our manned spaceflight program is at a real crossroads, and I certainly would look forward to working through this issue with the members of the committee and with NASA. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Pryor. And now, Dr. Holdren, I'm very honored to ask you to give your testimony. You're the Director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy. You've been very helpful to me on energy matters and many other ways, and I think you're a terrific appointment. And after that, Mr. Bolden, I'll introduce you. Please.
Well, Chairman Rockefeller, Ranking Member Hutchison, members of the committee, I certainly am happy to be here today to talk about the administration's new strategy for human space exploration activities. And I want to be clear at the outset, this administration is steadfast in its commitment to space exploration and to the mission of NASA. The President and I fully recognize exploration plays a vital role for our nation in advancing scientific discovery, stimulating technological innovation, enhancing our economic strength, expanding our horizons, inspiring our public and especially our kids about the potential of science and technology, and maintaining U.S. leadership internationally. But among the several challenges that faced this administration when it came to office were the technical and budgetary difficulties of the U.S. human spaceflight program, Constellation, that we had inherited. To assess that problem, OSTP and NASA stood up the most open, transparent, and participatory Federal Advisory Committee activity relating to space that has ever been undertaken, the Augustine Committee to review human spaceflight plans. As you know, the Augustine Committee concluded through that process that the Constellation program had become, quote, unexecutable, close quote, under any plausible set of assumptions about costs and budgets going forward. The victim of a mismatch between plans and available resources, exacerbated by decades of underinvestment in new technology and innovation at NASA. And in the pursuit of that increasingly costly program, while nonetheless failing to meet its objectives, would have the further liability of continuing to shortchange NASA's other critical activities, including, as you've mentioned, robotic missions, space telescopes, Earth observation, and aeronautics. It clearly was time to push the reset button. Accordingly, a decision support process engaging NASA and the White House was initiated to flesh out a set of options, drawing on the Augustine Committee's findings and aiming to maximize the level of exploration and achievement attainable under realistic budgets for the President's consideration. The result was the set of proposals for NASA's activities and budgets rolled out as part of the President's FY 2011 budget request on February 1st and elaborated, as Senator Nelson has mentioned, in the President's speech at the Kennedy Space Center on April 15th. The key elements in the administration's new strategy for maintaining and extending U.S. leadership in human space exploration deserve, I think, at least brief recapitulation here. We want to extend the life of the National Space Station to at least 2020. In doing so, deriving significantly increased benefits from it in science, in technology demonstration, providing a locus and focus for increased U.S. astronaut presence in space over the decade ahead, and maintaining the valuable international partnership that the International Space Station represents. We want to catalyze the development of and then utilize commercially provided crew and cargo transportation services to the International Space Station, resulting in what we believe will be more timely and cost-effective United States capabilities for that purpose than the previous program would have provided. We want to increase NASA's investments in transformative technologies that can expand the reach and reduce the costs of human exploration of deep space, beginning in this way to reverse decades of under-attention to that critical need. And we want to pursue a series of increasingly demanding human exploration missions, including a mission to an asteroid by 2025 and an orbital Mars mission in the mid-2030s, demonstrating key capabilities for a later Mars landing while also achieving historic firsts in exploration and discovery. I want to add a word about workforce issues. There are some near-term job losses in store, largely as a result of the retirement of the aging Space Shuttle fleet in early 2011. But that's not a new problem. The decision to retire the shuttle in that time frame was made in 2004 by the previous administration, based in part on the findings of the Columbia Accident Investigation Board and in part on the need to develop less costly as well as safer technology to get our astronauts into orbit. A dilemma in the era of limited budgets is that the high cost of operating the shuttle consumes the money that would be needed to develop its successor. The administration recognizes the pain and hardship of job losses in the communities affected, and we're taking a number of steps to reduce those impacts. The promotion of an expanded commercial space launch industry will create new jobs in many of the places affected by shuttle job losses, as will the $3 billion that will go into new R&D on heavy lift rockets in this period and additional billions in other new technologies. We think it's likely, given the additional spending in the new plan, that the magnitude of the shuttle-related jobs will be smaller and their duration shorter under the new plan than under the old one. But they will still be real. Therefore, further steps are being taken by the administration to mitigate those losses, including the Initiative for Regional Economic Growth and Job Creation along the Space Coast that the President announced on April 15th. In closing, let me say that the President and I appreciate this committee's interest in and support for the U.S. human spaceflight program and the other important missions of NASA. We are convinced that the new plan is the best way forward and optimistic that we can get it done. I look forward to working with you and others in the Congress to that end. I'd be happy, of course, to respond to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And now the Administrator of NASA, Charles F. Bolden Jr., who, in fact, a little over 24 years ago, flew with one Senator Bill Nelson. The floor is yours, sir.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you very much for the opportunity to appear today to discuss additional information about the President's fiscal year 2011 budget request for NASA, following the President's important speech at the NASA Kennedy Space Center in Florida. NASA is grateful for the support and guidance received from this committee through the years and looks forward to working with you to implement the President's bold new direction for the agency. Given that you have my detailed written statement, I will try to keep my remarks very brief this afternoon so that I have time for questions. But first, I would like to acknowledge the incredible contributions of my two astronaut colleagues and Norm Augustine, who will be on the second panel. Both Neil and Gene, the first and last humans to set foot on the moon, have dedicated their lives to the challenging and often unforgiving pursuit of space exploration, and in doing so has improved the quality of life in America and inspired the next generation of explorers. And they continue to contribute by remaining engaged and providing their remarks on today's important topic of future of human spaceflight. I appreciate their thoughts and ideas, and it was very beneficial to have had the opportunity to discuss their concerns over the past 3 weeks and to present them with a thorough brief on our plans for America's future in human spaceflight and exploration in a 2-hour brief last week in an attempt to allay concerns. However, reasonable people can disagree, and so I must respectfully disagree with some of the remarks from the first panel in their prepared remarks. The President's fiscal year 2011 budget request is good for NASA because it sets the agency on a sustainable path that is tightly linked to our nation's interests. During his visit to KSC, the President articulated a strong commitment to NASA's missions and future of U.S. human spaceflight exploration. The President also outlined an ambitious effort to foster the development of groundbreaking technologies, increase the number, scope, and pace of manned and unmanned space missions, make human spaceflight safer and more efficient, and help create thousands of new jobs. The President has laid out the goals and strategies for this new vision, which includes a sequence of deep space destinations for human missions, progressing step by step, beginning with crude flights early next decade of vehicles capable of supporting exploration beyond low Earth orbit, a human mission to an asteroid by 2025, and a human mission to orbit Mars and return safely to Earth in the 2030s. With respect to the role of heavy lift in the future human spaceflight architecture, the fiscal year 2011 budget request includes funds for NASA to conduct the important research and development and analysis necessary to make an informed decision on a heavy lift launch vehicle, no later than 2015. On May 3rd, NASA issued a request for information seeking general information regarding potential launch or space transportation architectures that will be used for planning and acquisition strategy development for current heavy lift planning activities. Regarding our plans for a restructured Orion, the President has directed me that NASA build on the good work already completed on the Orion crew capsule and focus the efforts to provide a simpler and more efficient design that will provide crew emergency escape from the space station and serve as part of the technical foundation for advanced spacecraft to be used in future deep space missions. This approach also will preserve a number of critical high-tech industry jobs and key disciplines needed for our future deep space exploration program. We have put together a formulation team, including headquarters and center personnel, to develop an approach that meets these requirements, balanced with other priorities proposed in the President's fiscal 2011 budget request. This team will report to me within 3 weeks on how best to meet these requirements. Dr. Holdren has already talked to you about the workforce initiative, so I won't cover that, but I will say that the task force which he mentioned, which I co-chair with the Secretary of Commerce Locke, will also explore future workforce and economic development activities that could be undertaken for affected aerospace communities in other states as appropriate, and we held the first meeting of that task force this morning. NASA expects to submit a revised fiscal year 2011 budget request to Congress in the near future that will identify funding requirements for the restructured Orion crew capsule as well as funding requirements for the workforce transition. Finally, regarding the International Space Station's role in furthering research, technology, and innovation, this orbiting national lab represents a unique research capability which the United States and its partner nations can use to conduct a wide variety of research in biology, chemistry, physics, and engineering fields that will help us better understand how to keep astronauts healthy and on long-duration space missions. ISS can and will play a key role in the technology demonstrations and engineering research associated with exploration. Mr. Chairman, in conclusion, Americans and people worldwide have turned to NASA for inspiration throughout our history. Our work gives people an opportunity to imagine what is barely possible, and we at NASA get to turn those dreams into real achievements for all humankind. This budget gives NASA a roadmap to even more historic achievements as it spurs innovation, employs Americans in fulfilling jobs, and engages people around the world as we enter an exciting new era in space. I thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for your support and that of this committee. I would be pleased to respond to any questions you or other members of the committee may have.
Thank you very much, Director Bolden. I'll start the questions, and I'll ask one which I hope each of you will answer. A variety of priorities have been suggested, and I suggested in my opening statement that what we did is not always, by definition, doesn't have to be always continue to do. I did, however, heavily mention human spaceflight. But Dr. Holdren, starting with you and then to you, Mr. Administrator, how would you list, if you're looking at the future, the budget requirements and the needs of the nation and the world, the priorities of NASA?
Well, Mr. Chairman, as I've already indicated, I think NASA has a number of important responsibilities, important areas of activity, and we really have to figure out, within the constraints of a limited budget, how to advance all of the most important ones. Clearly, human space exploration is an important element for the reasons I mentioned at the beginning of my testimony, and for others we could elaborate. It has been and will continue to be an immense inspiration to every new generation of American young people, bringing more of them into science, math, and engineering, strengthening our economy, enabling us to address a wide variety of other issues. And it's very important to the most fundamental of human drives, which is to understand and explore the universe around us. We have to maintain the Earth observation activities of NASA. We have to maintain the aeronautics activities of NASA, including its contributions to a next-generation air traffic control system, to green aviation, and much more. We have to maintain the contributions of NASA to the non-human exploration in the sense of space telescopes, in the sense of robotic missions. It really is not possible to say we can dispense with any of these, and I believe that under the President's plan, we can indeed nurture all of them in ways that will move us forward as a society.
So if I'm talking about medical and scientific and other kinds of research, those would fall somewhere below?
No, absolutely not. I'm talking about research. We need to do more research in understanding our place in the universe. We need to do more fundamental science using the capabilities of NASA. We need to use the capabilities of NASA to do more advanced technology development, some of which will be useful directly in the exploration program, and much of which will spin off into immensely valuable economic contributions across our society. What I'm saying, sir, is we need to maintain all of those major functions of NASA, and I'm saying that we believe we can do it with the budget that the President has proposed for FY11 and going forward.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, ironically, I woke up early this morning and I went online and I listened to the White House tapes from November 21st, 1962, and it was a heated discussion between President John Kennedy and NASA Administrator James Webb, who, by the way, was a Marine and a pilot. I didn't know that until this morning. But the discussion was about the question you just asked, and President Kennedy asked Administrator Webb, is lunar landing the top priority for NASA? And Administrator Webb said no. It's science, it's technology development, and for quite some time they went back and forth arguing about it. It's easy for me to answer your question. The top priority for NASA, in my estimation, is human spaceflight development and pushing us beyond the bonds of low Earth orbit. Everything else is second. It is only through the execution of human spaceflight that we can open up the avenues of making it available for us to do research and development. It is the desire to go to places like Mars that will draw on people, companies around the country, academia, if we can get them the money to develop the capabilities that will allow us to go places like that. Short of wanting to send humans beyond the bounds of low Earth orbit, we have a number of other federal agencies that can do my job. So that's a personal, you asked me a personal question, I gave you a personal opinion.
And I appreciate it, and I thank you, Senator Hutchinson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've listened to both of you, and you have focused on the science and going beyond low Earth orbit as the priorities, and I agree with you. In fact, General Bolden, in your testimony, you talk about the use of the space station, but you talk about what we can learn to make it healthier and better for astronauts and others to go into space, which is important. But there's also the vast field of medical technology that we have already gained immensely from space exploration. But there's more that is going on right now. NASA and NIH, as you know, have a memorandum of understanding. NIH is looking on treatment of causes of cancer, the diagnosis of heart, blood, vessel, lung, and blood diseases, cell and organism aging, reducing the burden of arthritis, and the development of new biomedical imaging, things that can be done in the microgravity conditions. The space station is such a key component of the research that Dr. Holdren, you are championing, and I know General Bolden, you also say is part of your focus, and yet we can't have a space station that will be productive, that will be stable, that we can be sure will fulfill the $100 billion investment that's already been made in that vehicle without the assurance that we can get people up there, that we can have the cargo that might be needed in the later years because it has been extended. And so I come back to the question of if you don't look at the stable source of getting people there, how can you say that science is going to be, or the mission and goal of science and productivity is going to be achieved? That's my concern. If the Soyuz is out of pocket, or if they raise their rates because they're the only means that we have, so that it's so prohibitive and we could be spending the same money on our own capabilities and learn from that much more than just renting space on the Soyuz, or if we have some blow up in the commercial companies that are not able to fulfill their contract. They are untested. You're putting all of our dreams and hopes and taxpayer dollars, commercial investment. What are you going to do if there are overruns, which there already are? Are you intending to have the taxpayers then have no choice but to go forward and spend more money? Why not do it in a tried and true, proven 40-year recorded entity, which is NASA? Why have you gone on this tack where you are putting so much emphasis on untested sources to assure that the space station will be utilized to its full potential?
Senator, if I may say, there's only one untested source, and it's not really untested. Of the two competitors right now in the COTS program, it's SpaceX. Orbital is a very successful space company. They have flown Pegasus and a number of other spacecraft for many years. They have flown payloads to orbit. They know what they're doing. Orbital was the subprime on the launch abort system that we just had an incredible success on out at White Sands. If I want to say why do I have confidence in them, I have confidence in them because they've demonstrated their ability to put things in space. When you talk about exploration and research on the International Space Station, I could not agree with you more. I am very confident and comfortable, however, with my partners, the Russians, because they have the best record of safety and reliability in terms of access to space. They have now flown, I think, 90 missions without an accident or loss of life. There is no other person, there is no other source of access to low Earth orbit that can match that record. And the last thing I will say is, as good as Energia is and Roscosmos, I defy anyone who says that American industry is not as good or better than they are. So I have to be confident that Orbital, SpaceX, McDonnell Douglas, not even around anymore, Boeing, the other American manufacturers can match, if not exceed, that of Energia. And I'm confident that American industry is better than Russian industry, and I'm happy with what the Russians do.
Could I add one?
I couldn't agree more that. Go ahead.
The one comment I wanted to add to that is just to remind folks that all of the rockets and all of the spacecraft that we've been using from the beginning of the space era have been built by the private sector. What we're talking about is changing the acquisition model.
But here is the key, and it's what I was going to say. It's not that we won't rely on private contractors. Of course we will, but it will be under the auspices and control of NASA and their tried and true 40 years of experience, not giving them $6 billion, which is what is in the President's proposal, and just saying, you go do this, without all of the other aspects, the training, the testing, the mission control. There is so much more than just building the rocket or building the half of the Orion. It has to all fit together. What my concern is, that you're terminating the constellation. In your budget, you've got $2.5 billion to terminate. That's the termination. There are reports all over the place that you're terminating contracts or that you're making it essential that they self-terminate. And for $2.5 billion, we could have another space shuttle. We could spread out the space shuttle for that. Over a year. You could have 2 in a year. So I'm just concerned about the priorities and the control, and I'm way over time, and I appreciate it, Mr. Chairman, and I know we'll have a lot of time to discuss this. Thank you.
You want to respond?
I'm going to make one statement that Administrator Bolden is probably too modest to make. Safety will remain under the oversight of NASA. This gentleman on my left was in charge of safety for the astronaut corps when he was an astronaut. He knows how important that is. While Charlie Bolden is administrator of NASA, there's going to be no shortfall in the oversight of the private sector in delivering astronauts to Earth orbit in terms of safety. I just wanted to make that one point because it has come up from time to time.
Mr. Chairman, let me just make one quick point. I'm not against the private sector. I'm just against the private sector being the only source of mission.
Senator Nelson.
And Senator Hutchinson, I think that's a good point. Space is a very unforgiving kind of environment, and NASA has always run the programs being built by contractors, not contractors running the programs with oversight of NASA. Now, that's a new way of doing business, Dr. Holdren.
Yep.
Needless to say, there are some people who question the wisdom of that. But the fact is that if it doesn't work or if it gets extended way out, then we don't have a backup system, save for our partners, the Russians. But they have a limited capability of getting stuff up and back with the size of the Soyuz. I want to get into the normal decision-making process, because normally what happens is NASA sends to the Office of Management and by November their budget, their suggested budget. And normally OMB then sends their iterations back to NASA for NASA's commentary. But that didn't happen this year. Instead, the passback from OMB came right at the time of the announcement of the President. And as you know, the President had to go down to the Kennedy Space Center and change some things because of the mistakes that were made in the rollout, which unfairly characterized the president as an opponent of human spaceflight, which this senator knows him to be an avid proponent. So, Dr. Holdren, I want to ask you, when OMB came back, did OMB consult you in the final determinations of the NASA budget? When I say you, I'm about your organization.
The answer to that in brief is yes, absolutely. But let me answer the question in a little more detail. As you know, Senator Nelson, this was not an ordinary year. It was a year in which a determination was made after receipt of the Augustine report that really fundamental changes in the priorities and the structure of NASA's human spaceflight program going forward were going to be necessary. And of necessity, the process of figuring out what those would be had to be integrated with the FY 2011 budget process. And that's the way it was done. There have been a number of suggestions, including one that we heard in one of the opening statements, that neither I nor the NASA administrator was involved in this process. I can assure you that the President's decision in this matter was not hasty, and it was not lacking in input from a wide range of well-informed advisors. Those included me.
Let me interrupt you because I'm down on limited time here. Dr. Holdren, when did the NASA administrator, when was he consulted in the period of time 2 weeks before the rollout of the budget?
Senator, I do not want to get into the internal pre-decisional deliberations and how they took place in detail. You and I both know that I can't do that.
Okay, but let me ask you this. Were any of the center directors in NASA consulted?
Senator Nelson, may I answer the question because if it's possible, because I think I know the answer better than Dr. Holdren in this particular case, because I'm beginning in, I became the NASA administrator in July, beginning in August, and there's a very smart young man who is sitting behind you on your right, who was my brain, my strategic brain, by the name of Tom Crimmins, and he will tell you that beginning in August, we had a series of strategic planning meetings among the senior leadership in NASA, which included the center directors, the associate administrators, and every senior leader in NASA. And this went on for a number, and during that period of time, we, because I'm a Marine, and I flew the space shuttle where we do disaster training, we discussed every potential outcome of the budget, and I spent probably a month where I asked everybody to look at the worst case scenario, which was, what happens if everything goes away and we get nothing and we have to start from scratch. And we knew that would not be good, but we determined that we in NASA, because we know how to do things, we could recover from that. So center directors, associate administrators, senior leadership of NASA has been involved in the deliberations that led to our submission of our budget proposal since August. As Dr. Holdren has said, because Augustine, the results from the Augustine committee were delayed from when we thought they would come, then we all found ourselves very late in the process in doing things. And as I have said to most of you when I've come to talk to you, I accept the blame. I am 6 months behind, conservatively, where I would have been in a normal process. We would have had discussions with members and their staffs back in the fall. We couldn't do that because Augustine came out and we went back to the drawing board again and continued to discuss. I provided lots of input to the President over a period of time. And as I have said before, it's my budget, it's my plan, and I am here to defend it because I think it is the right thing for us to do.
I'd like to say one more word to finish my answer, if I may, with your permission. The President heard from a lot of people in this process. He heard from me. He heard from Administrator Bolden. Senator Nelson, he heard from you. That doesn't mean that he took everybody's advice, but he did hear it, and he weighed it, and then, as presidents must, he arrived at a position that balanced all of the relevant considerations. And my own view is that out of that process, he got to the best and most balanced program for NASA, including its human spaceflight dimension, that the country can afford.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. And Senator Vitter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bolden, as you know, a lot of our concerns are about the capability of the commercial sector to do what we're asking them to do on time, on budget, putting essentially all our eggs in that basket. It was reported to me that in the conference call with Mr. Armstrong, Captain Cernan, last week that you had, I think you referred to the call itself for a couple hours, you told him that you would, quote, do whatever it takes, close quote, to make commercial work, including, quote, bailing them out, close quote, even if that would mean, quote, a bigger bailout than Chrysler and GM, close quote. What did you mean by that? If you
I'm not sure I said that, Senator. I'm not sure who was in the room, but, you know, as I have always said, I will do everything in my power to facilitate the success of the commercial entities in access to low Earth orbit. I have to have that. The Department of Defense has to have it. Our intelligence community has to have it. The budget today does not allow me to continue to build and operate in low Earth orbit if I want to go explore. The contingency that I am a contingency planner. You know, I have to look at the possibility that the commercial sector may have difficulty, and we will do everything in my power to facilitate their success. So that's what I meant when I said anything about.
Right. Mr. Bolden, what I've read is a lot more specific and different than what you just said. Did you say? Did you use the sort of language I used?
I don't remember using the sort of language you used. I don't remember that. This was just days ago.
Okay. Well, it made quite an impact on other folks on the conversation, and it raises my concerns at least.
Senator, I always have people talk about conversations I've had, and you know, I'm involved in the conversation, and I tell you what I said. I'm not sure who else was in the room. I know who was in the room with me, and I know who was on the line with Gene and Neil.
Okay.
Unless someone was taking the line.
No, I'm talking about direct participants who were taking notes. But anyway, as we sit here, do you think the timetable and the budget for that commercial program, do you personally think that's likely to stay on timetable and on budget?
I think we're going to stay pretty much on timetable. If we go exactly the way that the schedule is laid out right now, it will be the first time in the history of any endeavor involving space that everybody's made it on time. I expect that they will have technical difficulties, and we will help them through them. They have already had some technical difficulties, as we do, and we work through them.
Okay. In light of the continuation of Orion, why is it that NASA is taking actions which would constrain the funding of the program by shifting the termination liability costs onto the program, which is not the norm? I understand that's occurring in this case. That's not the norm, and there's been no decision by Congress in terms of funding.
Senator, termination liability is a factor that is in the contract of every supplier that NASA uses. It always has been. And if you're referring to my letter, I just reminded them to read their contracts.
Okay. Did you send a letter to the Hubble contractors, to the Webb telescope contractors? Did you send that letter to them?
Senator, we didn't have to send a letter to the Hubble contractors because they delivered without any problems. And in terms of James Webb, we continue to be constantly exercising oversight of them because I think, as all of you know, it has been a fiscal challenge for us, and it remains a fiscal challenge.
But are the termination liability costs being shifted onto the program? It's my understanding that they are, which is not normal procedure. It's my understanding that this is the case because of the administration's plan as opposed to other
Congressman,
NASA
the responsibility for termination liability lies with the company, and that is contractual. That's not something that we change. I can't change it because it's in the contract. Now, where the money lies.
What other contractors did you send this letter to?
I sent it to all of the prime. We had it sent to the prime contractors of the Constellation program because
what
this is
other
the program.
Contractors did you send it to?
We didn't have to send it to anybody because we didn't have any other program that had sent something to us saying that they were concerned about termination liability. But there are other programs in government that are going through the same thing right now because of the same reason.
Okay.
Because the risk decision lies with the company, and if it's a publicly traded company, it lies with the board of directors. And in that particular case, they have to decide whether they're going to put the money in the bank or whether they're going to spend it on people and things. And it is a risk decision that they have to make. Normally, when things are going along well, companies don't worry about it because they assume, there's going to be no problem. But that's a risk that the company decides the level of risk they're going to take. And I think if you talk to any business, they will tell you the same thing.
Mr. Chairman, if I can have one final question for Mr. Holdren. You talked about the budget constraints, which are certainly clear and obvious. But the bottom line is still that this NASA budget is an extra $6 billion over 5 years. And it's not going primarily to exploration. Maybe $1 billion is, and that's mostly research within that program. So it's a major increase going elsewhere. So isn't it true that with those significantly increased resources, certainly other things could have been done to focus more immediately on existing programs in human spaceflight?
Senator, it's always true that one can make different choices about allocation. We think we made the best choices about allocation available to us under the circumstances. The decision to invest more in research and development, in game-changing technologies, in technologies that ultimately can take us faster and farther, as opposed to continuing to invest in the existing programs which were already way over budget and behind schedule, was a very conscious decision to invest in what have always been the sources of U.S. leadership. The source of U.S. leadership has always been advanced technology, and the Augustine Committee's report and our own conclusion was that NASA had been underinvesting in the advanced technologies that we will ultimately need to continue to lead, to go farther in space. We couldn't have it both ways. We couldn't continue to invest in the old program at the levels that it was requiring and invest in these other possibilities.
Senator, if I may add just one thing and I suggest you ask Norm Augustine when he comes in on the panel, because he will tell you it was a matter of taking $6 billion and spreading it over 5 years for investments in technology development, aeronautics, science, and commercial, or taking that $6 million chunk and putting it in 1 year for the Constellation program, not knowing how you would get to the next year. And Norm Augustine will tell you that. His recommendation was, okay, let's take a modest amount. Let's take $3 billion, and that was one of the options that they offered. The fiscal times dictated to me, my fiscal responsibility to the President was to advise him that it would be much smarter to take $6 billion and instead of putting it in 1 year of trying to catch Constellation up and then wondering where I was going to get the $6 billion the next year, let's spread it over 5 years. Let's get a grip on our technology development. Let's restore prominence to science and aeronautics. And people are happy. You can't find anybody in the scientists always argue about priorities, but you can't. It's hard to find somebody in the science or aeronautics community who will not tell you that this is an incredible budget for them. You can't find a university president who will not tell you this is a great budget for them, because they now, I just came from MIT and Harvard on
Bolden,
Monday, and they're happy.
I don't want to interrupt you, but
yes,
you're going to have to learn time limits.
Yes, sir.
Keeping it brief. Otherwise, you eat up senators' time.
Yes, sir.
And they don't like that, and then they don't vote for what you want.
Yes, sir.
Senator Lemieux.
After the General Bolden, after the last shuttle flight, that's going to be the end of this year or the beginning of next? Is that what's currently scheduled?
Yes, sir. That's our hope.
All right. Assuming that that's what happens, what will be the next NASA mission to low Earth orbit?
The next NASA mission to low Earth orbit will be the next Soyuz that launches carrying a crew to the International Space Station at its next 6-month increment.
Next NASA mission that's powered with a NASA rocket.
And I'm not trying to be cute. The next NASA mission will be flown on a commercial rocket, just as the shuttle is. It will be a commercial rocket that we leased instead of
which rocket will that be?
The first one will be SpaceX. It will be Falcon 9 in 2011, and then late 2011, early 2012 will be Taurus 2, and then they'll go through a sequence of demonstration flights that will allow us to take them to the point where they work on contract. Right now, everything is their dime. I gave them $250 million apiece, and they have to demonstrate with that money.
Are those rockets taking us to the International Space Station?
They will take us to the International Space Station.
In 2011?
Oh, no, sir. No. The first time that we will have a commercial rocket take us to the International Space Station with a crew will probably be about 2015.
Okay, so 5 years from now,
yes, sir.
Your estimation is that those commercial rockets are going to be available to take us to low Earth orbit?
Yes, sir.
And is that why you're saying that 2015 is the decision time, or the President is articulating 2015 is the decision time to
on a
make
heavy
lift?
No, sir. Has no connection with that.
Why are we waiting until 2015?
We're not waiting. I said no. I asked the President to challenge me. And I asked the President to give me a deadline of no later than 2015. Originally, it was in 2015. If I have to wait until 2015 to make a decision, that prolongs the amount of time before I can start building a heavy lift launch vehicle. If I could give it to him tomorrow, I would. I can't.
You can't.
I can't give him a recommendation on the architecture for a heavy lift launch vehicle because I'm not smart enough.
What about the Ares rockets?
Ares are great rockets, but I'm not sure that that's the best for the nation. I'm not sure it's the most cost effective. I'm not sure that we have the technology, that we can sustain the technology that's going into Ares right now. I'm not sure that we want to use solid rocket boosters in first stage. It may be that we want, because I'm trying to find a rocket that DOD, the intelligence community, ESA can use, and that may not be a solid rocket motor. That may be LOX-RP, or it may be LOX-hydrogen.
How much money have we spent on the Ares rocket so far?
On the Constellation program, we've spent about $9 billion over the last 5 or 6 years, and not a dime of it has been wasted.
So you're going to be able to use the money that we've already spent to make a decision on a new rocket as opposed to continuing the rockets we're developing?
I'm going to be able to use the products that came about from that $9 billion of expenditure. Some rovers that have been developed as a part of the program that now I don't need to put permanent habitats on the moon. A robot that we worked with General Motors in a Space Act agreement that we call R2, a dexterous robot that can throw a baseball but can also...
I'm sorry, General. My time, as the Chairman said, is limited, so I want to get back to the rocket issue. If we've already invested billions of dollars
yes, sir.
In this heavy lift technology...
No, sir. We have not.
How much did we invest in the Ares rocket?
So far, well, the only rocket that we've invested in so far has been Ares 1 because the investment in Ares 1 it reduces the amount of money you have to pay for the Ares 5 rocket.
How much did we invest in that?
Let me take it. I'll have to bring it back to you for the record because I can't break out the $9 billion among the different components of the Constellation program.
Say that again. You can't break out the different parts of the Constellation
I can't, for you right now at this table, break out the different components, the amount that we have spent on the different components of the Constellation program.
Is that something that you'd submit for us?
Yes, sir. We'll get that for the record. Okay. Yes, sir.
Let me quickly, since my time is short, ask you about termination.
Yes, sir.
Are you telling vendors right now that you're terminating the Constellation program?
No, sir, I am not. I cannot tell them that. They know, however, that the 2011 budget, the President's 2011 budget proposal, the language is very explicit. It calls for termination of the Constellation program.
But that's just his proposal.
That's his proposal.
You understand the law of the land right now as a
Sir, I abide by the law of the land right now, and we are not terminating anything. I can't do that lawfully.
That's my time, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Brownback.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I want to follow up on what Senator Lemieux was asking on the schedule on commercial space flights. A bit new information to me. So NASA is going to be paying for initial flights in late 2011 by SpaceX on, was it 2 vehicles that you're saying, Falcon 9 and then Taurus 2?
Falcon 9 and Taurus 2 are the first 2 commercial vehicles. Yes.
Okay, what are you going to be? What's NASA paying for?
Right now, NASA paid $250 million to each SpaceX and Orbital as part of a Space Act agreement. That was to give them seed money so that they could go off and develop a commercial capability, and that's why that's all I paid.
But they're going to launch something in late 2011.
That will be the first flight that they will fly for me. Falcon 9 will actually launch the end of this month or early June, but that's not for me. That's for another customer. That goes in my data bank.
Okay. What will they fly for you in late 2011?
It's a demonstration to demonstrate that they can get the vehicle to low Earth orbit. When they separate the Dragon module, they have to fly, navigate themselves to the International Space Station, get to a point where and I can take it and berth it. So they have a number of demonstration flights that they have to fly before I'm going to let them get anywhere close to the International Space Station.
And that will be the first demonstration flight that they will be doing is late 2011 for you?
Let me go back and get it for the record for you. So I don't want to, because there are a series of flights that they have to fly, and I want to make sure that I'm giving you accurate information on which, because each flight is for a different purpose. It's an incremental progression, and I'll get that to you.
How many flights are they going to be flying before 2015, which is when you send them up to the space station?
3. Let me get that for the record, sir, because I don't want to give you and it's just the same for Orbital. They each has a certain number of flights they fly under the COTS program that I paid for with the $250 million, and then they go into a cargo resupply, but that is a contract. So for that, they make money every time they deliver something to orbit. So I'll get you the data on the specific scheduled dates of the flights.
I think for the chairman, for me, I think for the whole committee, the more specific you are on this, because obviously people have a lot of questions about now how are you going to stand up the capacity and want to make sure it's reliable. Will these be manned flights, the late 2011 ones by SpaceX?
No. It's cargo only.
Okay, so no, there will not be.
We've got a long way to go before. We have a long way to go, and when I say a long way to go, they've got to demonstrate their ability to get cargo to orbit safely.
In an unmanned vehicle.
In an unmanned vehicle. Okay. And there are several flights along that.
When is your year marker for when they'll have a manned space flight before it goes to the station?
My target right now is for them to fly their first crewed flight for me in 2015.
First crew flight. So the first one will go to the space station.
Yes, sir.
In 2015. Okay. Now, I'm struck by the Augustine report, and I'm a fan of Norm Augustine. I've known him for some years, and I think he's just really solid American. But I'm troubled about. It feels like we're losing control, or it feels like we're losing leadership in the manned space arena. And yet, I gather from his data, and he says there's just not another way for us to continue human space flight on the budget that he believes we're willing to do. Is this strictly a dollars and cents issue then, Director?
Senator, everything's a dollar and cents issue, and you buy it by the pound. If we want to explore beyond low Earth orbit, we have to free NASA of the responsibility for day-to-day operations. I have to free myself of the $2 billion annual infrastructure costs. It's there whether if I don't fly a single shuttle mission, I pay $2 billion a year just for the infrastructure. I've got to be able to free myself of that so that I can go beyond low Earth orbit. And that's the importance of the commercial entities in providing transportation to lower Earth
Let me
orbit.
put, because my time's about up, is there any other way for us to continue an aggressive human space flight program with the budgetary dollars you've talked about other than the one you've prescribed?
Senator, we will continue an aggressive human space flight program because I have astronauts. I just selected a group of this past year, and I have a number of them who are in training to fly on the International Space Station right now through 2015, and we're getting ready to make subsequent crew assignments to fly through 2020. So we do not intend to stop going to space. We're going to, as Senator Hutchinson says, we've got a lot of work to be done on the International Space Station, and I can't take a day off.
Having the Russians are going to cart us back and forth.
Senator, the Russians have been carting us back and forth for 10 years.
I understand that. I'm asking you just point blank. Is there another way for us to be able to continue an aggressive human space flight program other than the one you've outlined here?
Within the budget?
Within the budget.
The program of record, Constellation, will not enable me to do what I just told you I want to do.
Okay. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Brownback. I have one short question. I think Senator Nelson has a question, Senator Hutchinson, if she wants.
I've got about 20 more
Yes,
questions, but I really don't want to make the astronauts and Mr. Augustine keep waiting, so I'm so sorry because this is so important.
I know. I'm going to ask one short question. This is all, to me, actually very interesting. And the putting together of this was very difficult. There was a lot of kind of combativeness and suspicion. You heard some of the comments that sort of secret society formation of the plan, which Norm Augustine can talk about how he joined that group. But there's, in my mind, frankly, a sense of not being settled or comfortable with where we have been going. And part of that is based upon the history and the mystery and the mysticism and the culture and the romance, in a sense, of 1962 and thereafter. Our generations, America needs to catch up in the world. We're behind in virtually everything we do, from telecommunications to science, technology, engineering, and math. So let me just take science, technology, engineering, and math for 1 second and ask one question. That has nothing to do with human spaceflight. I understand that. Human spaceflight is a given. Going into the far reaches of the universe is something which I will ask about later on another day. But if we don't do our work in science, technology, engineering, and math, all of what you are talking about and all of which you work on, Dr. Holdren, is going to become less and less possible as fewer and fewer Americans attach themselves to those things which lead to what NASA does. So I noticed in the budget that what you have is what I would call, inspiring the next generation. It used to be, you just mentioned the name John Glenn or the two astronauts, which will come out very shortly, or yourself. And
those were the good old days, Senator. They don't even recognize my name.
For the record. But there's a new kind of a hunger in the new generation. They want, the head of the channel was here last week and told us that between the ages of 12 and 22, more young people of their own volition, obviously, watch the Discovery Channel and all of its uncovering of the mysteries of science and all the rest of it, technology, et cetera, than watch ESPN. Mm-hmm. And I assume, other cable channels. Fascinating, powerful statement. A young generation waiting to be inspired, of their own choice, reaching out to be inspired by products which happen to be there. So you have something called an education budget. And you're putting less than 1% of NASA's budget into what I call education, which I look upon as the future generations waiting to participate in ventures. Can you respond?
Yes, sir. There are direct and indirect ways that we contribute to education. I'm glad you asked the question. NASA has 312 FIRST robotics teams that we sponsor, more than any other federal agency, more than any other company in the. If you don't know about FIRST robotics, I'd recommend you go. It is fascinating. I went to the international championships. That inspires kids. We have something that's flying on the International Space Station right now called spheres. They're just round balls produced at MIT that up until now, for about, I want to say since 2006, have been flying around inside the International Space Station, programmed by college students who are doing research with the Summer of Innovation, a program that we are rolling out. We just rolled out the first award on Monday in Boston with Governor Patrick. We are going to extend the opportunity for middle school students to program a sphere or a set of spheres that's going to fly around inside the International Space Station. To me, that's inspirational. I don't care what anybody says. A kid doesn't have to become an astronaut.
Mr. Chairman, the President and I, as well as Administrator Bolden, completely agree with you about the priority that we have to give to science, technology, engineering, and math education. The President rolled out last November an Educate to Innovate initiative based around partnerships with the private sector, including, by the way, the Discovery Channel. The Discovery Channel and Time Warner Cable are combining 2 hours of after-school exciting science programming, free of commercials every day on cable channels around the country. Over $500 million pledged in money and in-kind support from private industry and foundations to help us improve STEM education in this country. Administrator Bolden and I both this week were out as part of National Laboratory Day, which is all about improving the science and engineering labs available in every middle school and high school in this country. NASA is part of an administrative partnership that engages as well the NSF, the Department of Energy, and of course the Department of Education. We're doing a lot in that domain. The President is absolutely ecstatic about what we're getting done, and we couldn't agree with you more. But these things are all related. NASA's success, DOE's success, NSF's success is linked to the success of the education programs we promote through the White House and the Department of Education. It's all coming together.
I thank you, sir. Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Bolden, did you have any discussions with the Department of Defense upon the effect of the cancellation of the solid rocket motor program in NASA on OD?
You said, I think, Dr. Bolden, so I'm not sure which of us.
Dr. Holdren.
Okay. Yes, we did. We had a number of discussions with folks in the Department of Defense, and I have to say, in all honesty, the Department of Defense is still looking at it. Those initial conversations communicated to us that there would be an impact, but it did not appear to be an unmanageable impact.
Would it?
And those considerations are going on, I understand, even as we speak. But I continue to believe
those considerations are going on as you speak. But would it surprise you that there is a complete record in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee by General Chilton, who is one of the generals charged with the strategic defense of the country, as well as the other general, General Cartwright, who is the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who has his portfolio, the strategic defense, that in fact the DOD was absolutely shocked that NASA suddenly came up with this program to cancel the test on the solid rocket motor. Since NASA has 70% of the industrial base of solid rocket motors, of which the remainder the Defense Department is absolutely reliant on. Does that surprise you?
Well, first of all, Senator, the DOD is a big place, and we didn't talk to everybody. We are aware that there is going to be an impact. The DOD obviously has an interest in this domain. I think that the DOD is probably capable of supporting its interest in this domain, although it may mean higher costs per unit for the DOD in acquiring the solids that they need. I'm not saying there's no issue there, and I'm not surprised that a variety of analyses exist in the department, but I believe that there will be a solution to that issue going forward.
Dr. Holdren, did you, have a discussion with Administrator Bolden within the week before the budget was rolled out to let him know what the final President's proposal was going to be?
Well, you say within, we certainly had it within the 2 weeks. It was well before the last week, and yes, we did.
So, General, you knew what the President's proposal was going to be, even though you were in Israel.
I actually found out
Before you went to
I think I found out before I went to Israel.
Yeah.
I was in Israel the week before the rollout, and I came back that Thursday night. But we had already met on the budget the week before.
Right.
All right, General. Can you tell me, is there discussion going on within NASA and OSTP now that you all are considering adding one more shuttle flight to the manifest?
Senator, that discussion has gone all the way up. I expressed, I have told people that there is potential that I would like to fly the Launch on Need mission, and it would be for logistics reasons. It would have nothing to do with jobs or anything else. It's just, if I have spare supplies that I can get on the International Space Station, I'd like to take every opportunity to do that. It is not an easy decision, though, because I will have no Launch on Need vehicle to back it up, and that's not trivial, that decision to do that.
But you do have the plans that would the worst happen on Ascent, so that that the crew could take safe refuge in the ISS.
Senator, we have contingency plans to include what happens to the crew if they can't get to the ISS, because everybody always, one of the things I hate is everybody always assumes you get to the International Space Station. That's a long way away. That's 200 miles. If you have a problem on Ascent, as you remember, when part of the back end of the orbiter comes off, you don't get to the ISS. So that's one of the reasons that I don't want that to happen, and I say it's not a trivial decision.
What would be the cost of continued Ares 1 testing?
Senator, I will get you the exact numbers, but it is in the neighborhood of about $1 billion to $1.6 billion. And the variation comes because if you're testing an Ares 1 vehicle and the plan is that it will morph into the Ares 5 vehicle, then you spread the cost across both vehicles. If doing is flying an Ares 1 test so that I can keep people working, it goes up to $1.6 billion because there is nothing else to help absorb that cost, and so it all goes to Ares 1. And that's why in our discussions I've said, as much as I am a tester, I cannot ask anymore, to allow me to test an Ares vehicle if there is something else I can use to get the same test of an Orion type vehicle or anything else done.
And speaking of Orion, and I know you want me to quit my questioning, speaking of Orion, why do we want a half-baked Orion instead of a full-baked Orion?
Senator, we don't want a half-baked Orion, and what we want is an incrementally developed crew module that can take people beyond low Earth orbit. What I don't want to do in any crew module is I don't want to settle on the design and configuration in 2010 when I know that the first time I'm going to send a human beyond low Earth orbit, the earliest is 2020. So if I settle on a vehicle, fly it in 2013, and the crew has to live with that same vehicle and its same configuration for 7 more years, they're going to be flying on a vehicle that's 7 years old. I don't want the Orion that's going to go to the moon and to Mars and to an asteroid. I don't want that final configuration internally made until as close as possible to flight.
Then why have a half-baked one? Why not rely on the Soyuz?
Senator, I need to have my people, American industry, continue to work on spacecraft. Otherwise, we lose the skill. We lose the talent. It's important for national pride and other things that we have an American-built vehicle that is docked to the International Space Station. And I can do that with the foundational vehicle that will be the basis for what's going to take us beyond low Earth orbit.
All right, we've reached a point now where we have only time for Senator Warner to ask hopefully just one question. We have two astronauts and Dr. Augustine waiting for us. We have not treated them fairly. On the other hand, we've really had just 1.5 rounds of questions. The subject is that interesting and that controversial, so I don't apologize for that. Senator Warner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me say this is a nice break from derivatives and high-frequency trading and some of the other things we've been dealing with on the floor. And let me also follow up very quickly, realizing my time is short. You mentioned the Educational Foundation. I do think there's interesting opportunities to leverage off of things. I think about the X Prize Foundation and the kind of energy that generated in this sector. Mm-hmm. I think I know how my colleague from Florida feels, and I understand I missed some of the earlier conversations, some controversy around the issue of the commercialization. I think it holds some great possibilities and opportunities, particularly possibilities of Wallops as a facility in the Commonwealth of Virginia. But one thing I am interested in, assuming for a moment that commercialization moves forward, and part of the challenge of NASA will be to ensure, as I think earlier questions have pointed out, the safety of these commercial missions, particularly going up to the ISS. Have you thought through how you set those standards, particularly in a commercial context? And is there some analogy that we could draw from NASA Langley working with FAA on setting safety and standards around commercial aircraft that we could perhaps utilize again from a
Senator,
standpoint?
We've thought
NASA Langley on setting those same standards.
We've thought it through very seriously, and we continue to think it through. And I have a group right now that is going to report to me on something I call insight and oversight. Senator Rockefeller talked about we can't continue to do things the way we do. We have too many boards and panels and oversight committees in NASA, and I have asked our folk to find a way we can get back to something reasonable. We don't need all the oversight committees that we have. That's costly, and it consumes time. A great example of the type of oversight that I would like to have is our relationship with the Russians and Soyuz. The Russians do a flight, before every flight, they do a flight readiness review, just like we do with the shuttle. People from my Space Operations Mission Directorate sitting in Moscow in the flight readiness review. They are a member of the team. When the Russians had their two dynamic reentries in the last couple of years, while we were not a part of the engineering investigation, we got all of the data on the mishaps, and we learned what had happened, and we learned what they did to correct it. And so I will use that sort of as a model. The disadvantage to commercial is that they don't have the experience that Soyuz has. We have 90 successful missions on Soyuz. So that makes me a lot more comfortable with them than, say, an upstart company in commercial development. But I will make them successful because I will establish standards, and they are looking at them now to make sure we're not being unreasonable. So we've thought about it a lot.
I would just point out again that the previous experience that NASA Langley had with FAA in terms of commercial aviation, there may be some lessons learned as next.
The work that Langley does in Next Gen, the Next Generation Air Transport System, we were talking about human spaceflight, but that is incredible. Langley, Glenn, Ames Research Center, we are all intimately involved in trying to make aviation, general aviation and commercial aviation flights safer, more efficient for everybody around the world. And Next Gen is going to do that.
And lessons learned there could perhaps be implemented.
Every day we're learning new lessons. Yes, sir.
I've got other questions for the record, Mr. Chairman, if I could.
You can submit those for the record, right? I want to thank both of you gentlemen. This has been a very interesting first panel. It's taken a long time, but that's because I think there is uncertainty, and I have questions about NASA. I always have. I still do, but we're, working our way towards something, and there are conflicting points of view. I mean, there's some people who just simply want it this way, and others who want it that way, and then some are trying to find a third way, and I guess I'm in that category. In any event, I really thank you, Dr. Holdren, extremely, for being here, and also to you, General, for being here. I honor you both, and I thank you both.
Thank you very much.
We will now be in recess for 30 seconds. If we could hurry up this process, please. To the press and to anybody else, we're looking for our two good astronauts and Dr. Augustine. We need them in front of at the witness table. What is the problem with getting the next panel in here? They're right next door. Here they come. Neil. First thing I do.
Oh, that's all right. I'm looking for the first one. Go ahead. You do better than I will.
All right, the panel will be seated, please, and the press will finish with obligations, and we will proceed. I want to welcome I want order in this hearing room, and JJ, you will enforce it. Somebody turn the lights back on. It would be helpful too, or maybe not. Maybe we can keep them off and we get it going better. I want to welcome Mr. Neil Armstrong, who's commander of Apollo 11, Captain Eugene Cernan, who is commander of Apollo 17, and Norman Augustine, who I've known for many years and who is the chairman of the review of the U.S. Human Spaceflight Plans Committee. And we will start with you, Mr. Armstrong. And pull that up and turn the button on. No?
How about that?
That's good.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, the committee, I want to express my sincere appreciation for being invited to present the views on NASA's new plan for human spaceflight. New non-classified national program concepts are typically accompanied by substantial review and debate in a number of venues. That process is occasionally frustrating, but it assures that all the major issues, performance, cost, funding, safety, schedule, and so forth, will be examined in some detail prior to a public proposal. After the tragic loss of Columbia and its crew and the completion of the accident investigation, Admiral Gaiman, the chairman of the Columbia Accident Investigation Board, noted that NASA needed a long-term strategic guiding vision. President Bush, after reflection, proposed such a vision: finish the International Space Station, return to the moon, establish a permanent presence there, and venture onward toward Mars. As this committee well knows, that vision was analyzed, debated, and improved upon with the Congress for nearly 2 years. You then concluded nearly unanimously that it was the appropriate policy for our country. 3 years later, after a change in congressional control, the policy was once again approved, although it was still not adequately funded. With regard to President Obama's 2010 plan, I have yet to find a person in NASA, the Defense Department, the Air Force, the National Academies, industry, or academia that had any knowledge of the plan prior to its announcement. Rumors abound that neither the NASA administrator nor the President's Science and Technology Advisor were knowledgeable about the plan. Lack of review normally guarantees there will be overlooked requirements and unwelcome consequences. For this plan, that is, America has invested substantially for more than half a century to acquire a position of leadership in space. But for any organization, a public utility, an airline, a university, or an NFL team, to maintain a leadership position requires steadfast determination and a continuing investment in the future. That investment must be made wisely. I believe that so far, our national investment in space and our sharing of that knowledge gained with the rest of the world has been made wisely and has served us very well. America is respected for its contributions it has made in learning to sail on this new ocean. If the leadership we have acquired through our investment is simply allowed to fade away, other nations will surely step in where we have faltered. I do not believe that would be in our best interests. I'm very concerned the new plan, as I understand it, will prohibit us from having human access to low Earth orbit on our own rockets and spacecraft until the private aerospace industry is able to qualify their hardware under development as rated for human occupancy. I support the encouragement of newcomers toward their goal of lower cost access to space. But having cut my teeth in rockets more than 50 years ago, I am not confident. The most experienced rocket engineers with whom I have spoken believe that it will require many years and substantial investment to reach the necessary level of safety and reliability. If these experts are correct, the United States will be limited to buying passage to the International Space Station from Russia and will be prohibited from traveling to other destinations in low Earth orbit, such as the Hubble telescope, or any of the frequently mentioned destinations that are out on the space frontier. As I examined the plan, as stated during the subsequent explanations, I find a number of assertions which are, at best, demand careful analysis, and at worst, do not deserve any analysis. I do believe if the National Space Plan is subject to the normal review process of this Congress, the aerospace industry, and the reliable experts that we know in the military and the aerospace community, America will be well served. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Armstrong, very much. Captain Cernan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to, again, thank you for inviting me here today to express my personal views concerning the administration's 2011 budget as it pertains to America's Role in the Future of Human Space Exploration. 1 month ago, Neil Armstrong, Jim Lovell, and I released an opinion paper expressing our concern over the administration's proposed space budget. We spent a great deal of writing and refining over and over again this document, choosing our words very carefully. Words like devastating, slide to mediocrity, and third-rate stature, primarily because we did not want to be misunderstood, nor did we want to be misinterpreted. We particularly wanted to avoid any political overtones because since the beginning days of NASA, its support has come from traditionally bipartisan politics. It has transcended our political differences. We have recently heard a lot of eloquent verbiage about the exploration of space, landing on an asteroid, circling Mars, and someday maybe even landing on a red planet. There is talk about a decision yet to come about building a large booster, which might ultimately someday almost take us to the far reaches of this universe. There are, however, no details, no specific challenge, and no commitment as to where or specifically when exploration might come to pass. And when one examines in detail the 2011 budget, nowhere can be found one penny, not one penny, allocated to the support of space exploration. Yes, there has been much rhetoric about transformative technology, heavy lift propulsion, research, robotic precursor missions. And these are all very worthwhile endeavors, yet nowhere do we find any mention of human space exploration. And nowhere do we find a commitment in dollars to support this national endeavor. Neil, Jim Lovell, and I have come to a unanimous conclusion that this budget proposal presents no challenges, has no focus, and is in fact a blueprint for a mission to nowhere. In this proposed budget, we find several billions of dollars allocated to developing commercial human access to low Earth orbit, based upon the assumptions and claims by those competing for this elusive contract who say they can achieve this goal in little more than 3 years, and they can do it for something less than $5 billion. Based upon my personal experience and what I believe is possible, I believe it might take as much as a decade, a full decade, and the cost may be 2 to 3 times as much as they predict. Although I strongly do support the goals and ideals of commercial access to space, the folks who propose such a limited architecture do not yet know what they don't know. There is a myriad of technical challenges in their future yet to be overcome, safety considerations which cannot be overlooked or compromised, as well as a business plan and investors they will have to satisfy. All this will lead to unplanned delays, which will cost the American taxpayer billions of unallocated dollars and lengthen the gap from shuttle retirement to the day we can once again access low Earth orbit, leaving us hostage as a nation to foreign powers for some indeterminate time in the future. This may be a sensitive point because I'm going to mention something about a dear who I ultimately have the ultimate respect for, Charlie Bolden, because we did have a briefing last week. And it was in that briefing that Charlie expressed some concern over the potential of the commercial sector to be successful in any reasonable length of time. He indicated we might have to subsidize them until they are successful. And I can say with authority because I wrote this down, and I put the words wow right next to it, because Charlie did say it may be a bailout like GM and Chrysler. As a matter of fact, it may be the largest bailout in history. The United States, through NASA, has spent a half a century, Mr. Chairman, learning what we didn't know, finding answers to questions we weren't smart enough to ask at the time. Developing technology that was needed to meet a challenge and get the job done. We came from Alan Shepard's flight in 1961 to the space shuttle and the International Space Station today. By the way, with a trip or two to the moon along the way. The evolution of this learning process was not without cost, not just in dollars, but in the lives of our friends and our colleagues. It took the courage, the effort, the dedication, and the self-sacrifice of thousands of Americans out there who allowed us to come this far, this quickly. And although we paid dearly for our mistakes, it is testimonial to their commitment and American ingenuity that everyone who went to the moon came home. Therein is a lesson we cannot afford to ignore, and I ask the question, is this the NASA we want to transform? For the sake of time, I will not go into my thoughts and concerns about game-changing technology without a goal, or the fact that we may or may not someday make a decision to build a heavy-lift booster, or the fact that I have major concerns about an Orion light, because I went into detail in my written testimony. Go back to Constellation, because it's an architecture that over a 5-year period has gone through detailed review processes and been vetted by every government agency from the OMB to the DOD and certainly by NASA. By every agency that has any ownership interest in any technical, scientific budget or benefit that might be derived from human space exploration. In addition, an arsenal of the best engineers and scientists, many of them who were yours over the years, and management experts in America's aerospace community added their knowledge and expertise to a review of the proposed Constellation architecture before it ever became a program worthy of consideration. And appropriately, as has been said already, under the law, both houses of Congress, overwhelmingly with bipartisan support, approved and agreed that Constellation should go forward. It is unknown how much time and thought was put into the existing budget proposal for 2011, or by whom this proposal was generated, but it is common knowledge that few, if any, of those government agencies referred to above were asked to participate. Nor of significant note was the DOD or the engineering or management expertise that exists throughout NASA today. This leads one to the conclusion that this proposal was most likely formulated in haste within the Office of Management and Budget and or the OMB, with little or with no input by his own admission in previous testimony, the NASA administrator, or I know for a fact by NASA center directors or senior NASA management. And if that were the case, the originators were quite likely promoting their own agenda rather than that of NASA and America's commitment to human space exploration. The space program has never been an entitlement. It's an investment in the future, an investment in technology and jobs and world respect and leadership, and perhaps most importantly, in the inspiration and the education of our youth. Mr. Chairman, you asked how much of the budget was gone into education. That goes into work and the spin-off information. The inspiration for our youth, came when Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. It's a freebie that comes from space exploration. Those best and the brightest minds at NASA and throughout the multitudes of the private contractors, large and small, did not join the team to design windmills, but to live their dreams of once again taking us where no man has gone before. In closing, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to say America's human spaceflight program has for a half a century risen above partisan differences, from Eisenhower to Kennedy to the present day. The challenges and accomplishments of the past were those of a nation, never of a political party, nor were they of any individual agenda. Those flags which fly today in those valleys on the moon are not blue flags and are not red flags. They're American flags. If we abdicate our leadership in space today, not only is human spaceflight and space exploration at risk, but I personally believe the future of this country and thus the future of our and grandchildren as well. Now is the time for wiser heads in Congress of the United States to prevail. Now is the time to overrule this administration's pledge to mediocrity. Now is the time to be bold, innovative, and wise in how we invest in the future of America. I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to share with you my passion. And that, quite simply, is the future of our country.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Augustine.
Well, Mr. Chairman, Senator Hutchison, and members of the committee, I'd like to thank you for permitting me to speak and represent my colleagues on the Human Spaceflight Plans Program. I have a statement I would like to submit for the record. I should probably begin by saying that it would be very difficult to gather a group of 4 people who I admire more or treasure their friendship than the 2 gentlemen beside me and the 2 who appeared before us. I think we all share at least one thing in common, and that is that we want a strong human spaceflight exploration program for our nation. I'd say why. Our panel tried to answer that, and we said that certainly the science to be derived is not unimportant. The same can be said of the economic impact and new products. And certainly engineering achievements have been very significant indeed. But while all of these things are important, it was the view of our committee that taken by themselves are not sufficient to justify the cost of a human exploration program. One has to justify that program, and we think one can justify it based upon intangibles. And the fact that they're intangible makes them no less significant in our view. The human spaceflight program can blaze a path for humans to move into outer space. It inspires the young people to study science and engineering. We've seen that so many of the scientists and engineers today were inspired by the 2 gentlemen beside me and others like them. But more importantly, I think even, is that it says to the world what the American people can accomplish with our system of government and our system of free enterprise. That all this comes from a dime a day per citizen, which would seem to be a very great bargain. Now, one can say a great deal could be done with robots, and that's certainly true and should be. But there are certain things that robots can't do. One thing would be, for example, to make the first repair to the Hubble telescope program. I can't imagine a robot that could have done that. Similarly, there are the intangibles. Does anyone remember the name of the first robot that stepped on the moon? Launching a rocket to the top of Everest with a flag in it is quite different than Sir Edmund Hillary climbing to the top of Everest. But that's what makes the human spaceflight program so important to so many of us. I was asked to make a few brief comments on some of the conclusions from the study I chaired 20 years ago on the space program as a whole. Some of the conclusions that perhaps relate to the issue of today. And I would cite just 5. The first was, at that time, 20 years ago, we concluded that NASA was being asked to accomplish goals and being given resources that didn't match those goals, and that was a very dangerous thing to do, particularly in space. Second was reflecting our skepticism of the reliability calculations that were being done. We said that it was very likely we would lose another shuttle. Sadly, that proved to be the case. We said that the heavy lift vehicle was the most important project in the human spaceflight program because it really is the gateway to outer space. And if one thinks about it, the U.S. has not had an astronaut go more than 300 miles from the Earth since my colleague here left it some years ago. We thought that a strong technology program was being starved, that we didn't have a strong technology program 20 years ago. And we said that one of the consequences will be that future decision makers will have very few options. And finally, we said we need a balanced space program, balanced in terms of human spaceflight, robotics, balanced in exploration and science, and so forth. Turning to the recent review of the human spaceflight program that I had the privilege of chairing, we had 10 members on our committee. Our findings were unanimous, as reflected in the 150-some page report that you probably had a chance to read. The first question is, why not just continue the Constellation program? That certainly is the easy, logical answer. And one could do that. But there's some problems with that. Let me cite just two. When the Constellation program was begun, what was now 5 years ago, 4 years from the time we did our study, NASA assumed a budget profile out for some 20 years. And in talking to the people who ran NASA at the time, they really believed, I think, that they had good reason to accept that budget profile. But be that as it may, they've received each year only 2/3 of that amount. In other words, it was a 1/3 reduction every year. The consequence, coupled with technical problems that the programs have encountered, is that during the 4 years that the Ares 1 program has been going, for example, it slipped somewhere between 3 and 5 years of schedule, depending on whose numbers one chooses to accept. In addition, we were concerned about the goal of the program, which was focused on going back to rather than something more aggressive, like eventually going to Mars with some interesting intermediate stops. Talking to people, many people, particularly young people, we found that when we said 20 years from now we'll be going back to the moon, most of their response was, well, they did that 60 years ago, or they will have done it 60 years ago. And that led us to be very concerned that our nation would not be able to maintain the financial support for a program that would require continuous support from 5 administrations, 9 Congresses, and 18 budget cycles. Let me turn to the President's program very briefly, as it was modified in his remarks at Cape Kennedy a few weeks ago. That program fairly closely approximates one of our options, option 5B. And I should emphasize that we were asked to provide options, not to provide recommendations, so that we could try to be somewhat neutral in this discussion. And we're trying very hard to do that. The President's program, in our view, is reflected in option 5B. They do differ somewhat. We consider it to be a viable program, and we rated it very highly in our overall assessment. We offered 2 very important caveats. The first is that a vital part of that option is its funding profile, not just the next 5 years, but throughout the entire program. And the second was that decisions truly be made on the schedule that they have been planned. And I'm sorry to report to you that we, as best as we tried, could find no interesting human space exploration program for a sum of money substantially below the enhanced budget level we described, which simply stated adds about $3 billion a year to the current NASA budget, and then has to be inflated appropriately. The most important request I would make to this committee on behalf of my colleagues on the Human Spaceflight Committee was that whatever a program is approved, that its goals match the budget. Otherwise, I think we'll all be back here 10 years from now having the same discussion. And that certainly remains the hope of myself and the committee I had the privilege of serving on, that America can have a strong human spaceflight program, reflecting the title of our report, which was a human spaceflight program worthy of a great nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Augustine, very much. I'm going to ask the first question. Captain Cernan, you indicated that we were potentially headed on a journey to nowhere. And I guess I have, in all honesty, to respond by saying that I am not a huge, but I'm a substantial skeptic of human spaceflight. We're approximately the same generation, but that's where I am. I cannot support going into space as an end in and of itself. I agree with the President that we need a measured, nationally, globally relevant, and sustainable human spaceflight program, not one solely bound by and time in space. But my mind is not closed, because I'm not an expert. I want to understand the value of human spaceflight. But I bring one other dimension to it. I want to understand human spaceflight. I'm asking this of any of you, not all three of you, but any of you, that it not just be the matter of spaceflight, but that it also relate to the human condition, not only in the world, but also in our own country. I think NASA was conceived brilliantly with the idea of simply doing something that had never been done before. And we've done it now a number of times. And I don't mean to say by that that we should stop doing it. But I do think we have to stop doing things exactly the same way. I mean, NASA, for a number of years, a lot of criticism over how it's run its state, managed its programs. The GAO has not been kind, and various analysts have worried about over expenditures, things of that sort. So I want to understand the value of human spaceflight. So I want one of you to tell me how NASA's human spaceflight programs advance the agency's overall mission today and in the future. And I also want you to explain how human spaceflight, in that it's in a context of other priorities for NASA, helps the human condition sufficiently to its budget in America.
You're asking for a lot. I will do my best, and I'll certainly let my colleagues here help me if they would like. If you want to talk about technology, if you want to, technology which you have in your hands today, the technology to communicate around the world, the technology of communications itself, the technology that I have in my iPhone today is technology that was given birth to 30, 40, 50 years ago. I skipped over my comments about technology that we're talking about in a proposal. Exploration drives technology innovation, not the reverse. You can't lock a group of the smartest young men and women in the world in a room, engineers, scientists, technicians, and say, go develop technology. For what? There has to be a purpose, just like there has to be a purpose in life. They have to know what they're trying to accomplish, what their goal is, what the problems are, and then develop the technology that gets the job done. Going to the moon, the that we developed to go to the moon, whether it was material. Look in walk in our hospitals today, walk in our classrooms today. Does that benefit is that a benefit to us humans here on this earth today? I like to think it is. You can go deeper into that, but let me get a little bit more philosophical. Curiosity is the essence of human existence. Who are we? Where are we? Where do we come from? Where are we going? Where's the life on Mars? Is Mars like Earth is going to look in 1 billion years? Are we what Mars looked like 1 billion years ago? I don't know. I don't have any answer to those questions. I don't know what's over the hill and around the corner. But I want to find out. It's within our hearts and souls and desire to find out and seek knowledge. Discovery is what it's all about. And yes, we have been there, but we haven't been everywhere. There's a bottom to the ocean. You can walk the top of the highest mountains on this planet and you can walk on the depths of the deepest ocean, but you're still on Earth. And there is a difference between the frontier of space to seek knowledge. Was there life on Mars? Is there life? Now, I know there has to be other reasons to go there. That alone isn't enough. But that is one of the driving things. It's our destiny, I believe, to explore the unknown, to find answers to the questions. And God knows, for every answer we get, we'll come up with a dozen more questions. It's been that way all along. We've got more questions about the moon now than we did before we left, before we went there. So I'm probably not being as explicit as you'd like me to be, but the benefits to humans on this planet, whether it's communication satellites, weather satellites, predicting storms, whatever, you can go on and on and on. Those things were given birth to when Kennedy said we're going to go to the moon. He was asking us to do the impossible. He was asking us to do what most people didn't think could be done. And we didn't have the technology to do it. Is that technology, it's obsolete today in one sense, but American industry, American ingenuity has built upon that so that today what we have in our cars and our airplanes and our transportation, in every walk of life. I'll turn it over to Neil.
I can't. I've overrun my time.
Okay.
I thank you for your question. It was very helpful. Senator Hutchinson.
Mr. Chairman, I would just add to what Captain Cernan said and say that is it an improvement of our life on Earth that we can put a satellite-guided missile into a window from 3 miles out, and instead of killing 500 civilians, you kill the enemy that you are seeking? Is that an improvement? Because that's what has happened because we explored in space. Let me talk about the future. Dr. Samuel Ting, the Nobel laureate from MIT, talks about what we can do in the space station in the future to study cosmic rays, which are most intense in space, not on Earth, as potentially a future source of energy production. That's the kind of science we're talking about. We're not talking about just going into space to go into space. That's a valid question. And I think you've asked a valid question. And if that were all we were doing, I wouldn't be pushing this. I'm pushing it because if we continue our priorities in space, we will be the ones that can capture the cosmic rays and have the energy, renewable energy sources that will keep us from having to drill for oil and gas and go to the renewable energy of the future. That's why we're doing this. It is the future, and we want to do it, and rather than having others do it, so that we harness it. So I want to ask the question, because I want to go to something that Dr. Cernan said in his testimony that he didn't use because there were so many others, things that you did say. And that is talking about putting all of the money into private contractors, but having NASA take the step back rather than it being a NASA project with private contractors. And you said that we assume that this says that these private contractors that are not yet tested in a little more than 3 years for less than $5 billion can put people into low Earth orbit in a new vehicle. It assumes they can design, build, flight test, and develop a man-rated spacecraft and booster architecture along with the infrastructure required. This includes redesigning the requirements of mission control, developing the support and training simulators, writing technical manuals for training and onboard procedures, developing the synergy between the tracking network and the uniqueness of a newly designed space vehicle. These are just a few of the development and support requirements to put a new manned system into space. And basically what you went on to say is that you predict that it will be 10 years, not 3, for the private sector to do this, and at a cost which possibly could mean bailing out the companies because we couldn't really do all of that under $5 billion. My question is, do you think that money ought to be spent with NASA redo their plan so that they are in control, but not just with blinders on, as it seemed that General Bolden was saying, within my budget I can do this. Well, how about being more creative in your budget? How about not doing just Constellation, but a new configuration of Constellation? How about an Orion that isn't just a return vehicle, but one that can take people into space as well, but put our money not into termination contracts at $2.5 billion, not into programs that would try to help people who are going to lose their jobs, not into renting space on Soyuz, but in developing our own techniques so that we will gain these advantages. Would that be what you were proposing, Captain Cernan, in your statement?
Well, referred to what I think you asked at first about all the infrastructure that is needed to support the commercial sector, which is one of the reasons why I think the cost will go way up as well as the time. The Aerospace Corporation, I think, did a report that said it would take probably $10 to $12 billion to support the commercial sector, and it does not count the infrastructure, the simulators, the mission reconfiguration of mission control, the Earth Sea Rescue, because it's got to come down. Someone may come down where you don't want. All the procedures, everything that you have to develop. I mean, a lot of people think that, we played handball. When it came time to fly in space, we put on a spacesuit, jumped in a spacecraft, and went to the moon. We spent years and years helping the engineers at NASA, at Martin, at Rockwell, and helping design, develop, test. We were out there 24/7, 6, 8, whatever number of years it took to get the spacecraft that we were going to fly developed properly and safe, that we had confidence in. So how and when is that going to be prepared for? And what is the commercial sector how are they going to handle that? How are they going to pay for it? Are we going to subsidize all that? Is it going to be a NASA program or a program that NASA pays for that we let someone else run? Are they going to respond to all our regular requirements on safety? These are things that I don't think have been addressed properly yet. I don't think they've been looked at. As far as I think what you asked is where I would go. Well, my opinion is probably not worth much these days. But I'm concerned in the near term about the gap. In the long term, I'm concerned about exploration, because that's my bag. Exploration, going where no man has gone before, doing what has not ever been done before, that others couldn't do, wouldn't do, or maybe were afraid to do. That's exploration. But in the near term, we need to, I know how you feel about shuttle extension. I don't know anything about the capability to finance. I think we ought to stretch the shuttle out and close the gap from the front end. I think we ought to have something that closes the gap on the back end. I don't believe that is commercial space. I believe it is something we've invested $9 billion in already, called Ares 1 and Orion. Get it up, get it running, and instead of a potential gap of a decade, we might knock it down to 3 or 4 or 5 years. But at least we will tell the rest of the world that we're not going to stay slave to what they say we can do or can't do in space. We will have our own access, even if there is a gap of a few years. We are going to get there from here. Get that done, Senator. And while we're in the process of doing it, if you want to redesign Constellation's long-term exploration objectives and build a new booster or whatever it takes, that's the time to do it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Nelson.
Mr. Chairman, I want to try to answer your question, and it's a good question. And I want to thank you for the personal attention that you have given to this hearing, being right here the whole time. I am profoundly grateful for that. My answer to your question, why space, is because we as Americans are nature explorers. We've always had a frontier. When this nation was developed, we had visionary leaders like Thomas Jefferson, who paid initially about $2,000 for Lewis and Clark to go westward. That trip ended up costing the extraordinary sum of $36,000. But it was fulfilling our destiny as a people, which is by nature we are explorers and adventurers. And if we ever give up that characteristic, then we're going to be a second-rate nation. That frontier is no longer westward. That frontier is upward. And as Gene talked about, we are inquisitive. We are curious. Look what the Hubble Space Telescope has now opened the new vistas of knowledge, peering back in time to the beginning of the universe. And with the James Webb Telescope up there, we may be able to go right back to the origin of the universe. Is that valuable to us as an inquisitive people, as citizens of planet Earth? I think it is. That's my answer to your question. Now, may I ask a question of Dr. Augustine? Dr. Augustine, it goes without saying, thank you for your steady hand throughout the years. You've heard the strong opinions expressed by these two American heroes, and the committee that you headed contained representatives across the entire spectrum of government and aerospace. And it included military as well. And it included some astronauts. Now, can you describe how this administration's plan, and you can say how it amended, as the President amended it down at the Kennedy Space Center, can you describe how it compares with the options that you laid out in your report?
I'd be happy to do that, Senator Nelson. We had a possibility of up to 3,000 options based on the parameters we looked at. We narrowed it to 5 main options with a few subsets under several. And as I mentioned, this option 5B is fairly close to the one the President's proposed. There are two possible differences, two potentially significant differences. One is that our option went ahead with the development of the heavy lift launch vehicle right away, rather than wait up to 5 years. And the other is that we had a funding profile that phased it over 4 years, $3 billion a year, and then inflated beyond that with the aerospace appropriate inflator. And so our funding profile was substantially greater than the one that we were offered by OMB last year, because we couldn't answer with the OMB profile, to be frank. There are advantages to slipping the start of the heavy lift launch vehicle. As you would know, it gives you time to accumulate more advanced technology. It helps the early budget pressures when you're trying to keep the space station going, the ISS, at the same time. But you pay the price that you lose time in being able to pursue the program. And I think the biggest risk is when 5 years comes, or whatever it is, that you don't restart. And that would be a tragedy, in my opinion. That's, to me, the biggest risk. The option we looked at, 5B, that, as I say, with those differences, is close to the President's program. And assuming that the President's program is fully funded, and I haven't seen the out-year funding in any detail, so I can't testify to that. Assuming it's fully funded, we found that it was a rather exciting program that rather than wait 15, 20 years and then land on the moon, after a few years, it lets you, every few years thereafter, accomplished an objective that you could point to. You can dock with an asteroid. You might even try to move one a little bit. You can go to a Lagrangian point and conduct refueling operations, do maintenance like you might on a telescope. You can circumnavigate Mars. You can orbit Mars. You can land on one of Mars' moons, Deimos or Phobos, and from there control robots operating on Mars, which overcomes the huge problem of robotic exploration on Mars, namely that it takes up to 40 minutes to get a signal back and forth from here to Mars. So it offers all those rather exciting advantages, and that brings me to the two other aspects of the President's program that were similar to ours. We did say to shut down the shuttle, and the only way you could avoid the gap is to keep the shuttle going. The gap was created 5 years ago. That's a fait accompli. And if you want to avoid the gap, the only way I know, and of course by the gap we refer to being dependent upon the Russians to launch our astronauts to low Earth orbit. It'll be a 7-year gap, not a 5-year gap, and we probably better get used to that idea. If you continue to operate the shuttle, you can avoid much of the gap, but then you don't have, the shuttle consumes all the money you wanted to use to develop whatever is going to replace Constellation or some version of Constellation. And so in our deliberations, it kept coming back to how much money do you have available. And you get all these trade-offs that are just very hard to make. If you start a heavy lift launch vehicle now, it's that much less you have to improve the Orion. And the one thing that solves the problem is to add $3 billion a year, and I know how difficult that is in today's environment.
I want to make one final statement, and then I have to leave.
Could I have you're going to,
Oh, I'm sorry, but I need to do this because I have to
leave. Understand.
I meant to give a speech 10 minutes ago. What Senator Nelson indicated, the word exploration, I agree. That's the nature of what Americans have always been. What I think is also worth considering, and why I asked in my question to the captain how human spaceflight contributes to the condition of humankind on this earth, had another dimension to it. There are various forms of exploration. One is doing the undoable in the physical exploration sense. Lewis and Clark, you two gentlemen, what you did was just caught the world. The world's heart stopped. But it also stopped, but unnoticed, in 1878, I think, when Sir Isaac Newton came to open a new medical university called Johns Hopkins. And he said that in the 2,000 years previous to that date, there had been no advances in medicine at all. To wit, during the Civil War and other wars, that often diseases were considered to come from outside into the body, which is why powders were constantly being applied to wounds, but not necessarily diseases came from inside the body, which we now know to be different. And he did something, and Johns Hopkins did something. In those days, there was no federal funding for research of any sort. This is 125 years ago. There was no federal funding for medical research at all. There were no requirements. Harvard had a medical school, Yale had a medical school, Stanford had a medical school. They all had medical schools. You didn't even have to have a high school diploma to get into a medical school, much less a college degree. And so they took you and taught you nothing. What Johns Hopkins did when Sir Isaac Newton said, you follow the truth wherever it takes you in medicine. No compromise on that. You do what you have to do to follow the truth in science, in medicine. And as a result of that, literally, the medical education in the United States has been completely revolutionized. And we all understand that now. Now, that is also, that's not space flight, but it's doing the undoable, taking on the unknowable, challenging with no federal resources. Other, private foundations had to be suddenly activated to this idea of helping medical research. You could read about all of this in a book called The Great Influenza Epidemic of 1918 by John Barry. Tells you all about it. So I just wanted to say in parting, not to rebut anything that's been said, that exploration is a broad word. The American search for newness finds many outlets, most of them quite glorious, but not all of them. I thank you. And Senator Nelson will continue to chair the hearing.
Senator Brownback.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. What a fascinating hearing and great discussion. This is the kind of hearings we ought to have all the time. So thanks, gentlemen. Norm, why not do what Captain Cernan suggests here? Let's phase out the shuttle and use that money to fund and move forward with Constellation. We've spent, $9 billion on Constellation thus far? This is one of the things that drives me nuts, is that we start and stop these space programs all the time. We put $5 billion on it and say, new administration, let's go somewhere else. And just, I think it drives all folks crazy. But you've noted correctly, Constellation was underfunded by a third in this, but why not go the route that Captain Cernan suggested as a way to move forward with Constellation?
Well, that's a very good question, and it's a question we addressed early on. I've written more than I'd like to admit over my career about don't change programs, don't start and stop them. If you're going to start them, finish them, unless there's a very compelling reason to stop. But in this case, we think there's a very compelling reason. Yes, it's also very tragic to have to write off $9 billion or part of it, but it is a sunk cost. And it does contribute significantly, I think, to the building of a heavy lift launch vehicle sometime in the future. So part of the money is recoverable. The real issue, I think, comes down to the fact when the program was started, really the Ares 1 is the issue here. And I say that because the Constellation program, as you know, Senator, it has 4 parts. It has the Ares 1, the Orion capsule, the Altair lunar lander, and then the habitat on the moon. The latter 2 weren't able to be started because the former 2 ate up the money. So really it only has 2 parts that any money has gone into. One part is the Orion, which, as I understand the President's program, most of that will continue on. So it's really Ares 1 that's at issue. Ares 1 was set up by NASA in 2005 with 2 primary missions. One primary mission was to support the International Space Station, carry astronauts there. The second was to really 3. The second was to be a part of the space exploration program 15 years from now. And the third was to provide technology to build a heavy lift version of an Ares. The problem is when it immediately slipped what our committee believes is 5 years, by the time it's developed, at least on the plan that was being developed, the International Space Station is going to be back in the ocean. And if you add the 5 years to the life of the International Space Station, by the time the Ares gets developed, it'll have maybe 2 years to support the International Space Station. And then subsequent to that, you'll have a 15-year hiatus where it will either be the most expensive way in the world to put people in low Earth orbit, or after that, it'll be useful for the exploration program, but there's this long downtime. So the program made sense when it started. Today, it's not a bad program. The issue is not can we do it, but should we do it, at least in the form it was laid out.
And you don't believe we should do it then?
Our committee of the options we looked at, and I'm trying hard not to choose sides, but it was one of the least attractive as laid out.
I'm taken by Captain Cernan's comments, which is we don't seem to have a plan now. I mean, we got a lot of ideas floating around, but we don't seem to have a plan. We were working off of a plan, and I agree with the low Earth orbit that we ought to have the commercial sector. Let's try to develop that to go there. But I want a plan to go on, and this one seems to put that off for 5 years. But you just believe that the budgetary numbers are such that even if you took them, the shuttle money, you can't get there with the plan that we were on, and so you're just better off going to some.
Yeah, it was our conclusion that with the budget that was presented to us, there was really no way, particularly with NASA's very high fixed overhead costs, you and I talked about this, to conduct a human exploration program that would be meaningful and safe at all.
All right. Well, I hope this is the beginning of the discussion, Mr. Chairman, that we've got some good thoughts laid out here, but I hope this really now leads into getting the elbow grease on and us really digging into how it is that we move forward on these things. I thank you for your service, Norm, and Captain Cernan and Mr. Armstrong. You're these great American heroes, and I really appreciate your willingness to come back and to continue the fight for exploration that you've started and just gave us such an inspiration for, and that you don't give up on that inspiration. That, to me, is worth a huge amount. Even if you can't measure it, it's that intangible of the exploration that's worth a lot of money for us to do and for future generations. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hutchinson.
Yes, I want to just say that I've heard budget as the reason stated for why we can't keep the shuttle flying and close that gap. But if we're talking about putting $6 billion into the private sector companies that some of which are not developed yet or tested, and then we talk about having to, if they don't make their budgets, having to bail them out because you've already put $6 billion in. I'd rather talk about what is the best plan and then try to determine the priorities so that you stay within a budget but not become wedded to only one way of doing it, but determine what is the right plan to get us where I think all of our goal is, and that is to be able to use a space station and to explore and to assure that we are getting the scientific product that we have already invested $100 billion in. If we let the space station be in jeopardy of even being useful by not having the backup systems that we control, I don't know that that's good budgeting either. So I have a problem with what I'm hearing and the lack of creativity in what we do within that budget that I saw, especially in the first panel. I'd like to ask Mr. Armstrong on the safety issue. In your written statement, you talk about the taxi service that we'll be buying from the Russians and the Soyuz as being perhaps not necessarily the safety standards that we would have on our own shuttle. Would you talk about the safety issue?
Thank you. The prime recommendation of the Columbia Accident Investigation Board with respect to new vehicles in the future was that safety be considered the prime consideration. And who can argue with safety? But safety, you can't put all the money into safety. Safety has to be balanced with program requirements and others, and an acceptable level of safety has to be determined. That's what you're really searching for. We have pretty good confidence on the shuttle right now. We've had a number of safe flights now ever since the Columbia, and it seems to be operating well. Nevertheless, it's an old 40-year-old